Being able to change the drawing axes becomes of critical importance when you start to work with more complex geometry. Here I'm working with a 9-sided structure, and so I have some unusual angles to deal with. The drawing axes are represented by the red, green, and blue lines here forming a tripod. You can see that I've centered this within the design, and this is a good practice whenever you're dealing with a circular or regular polygonal structure to center it around the axes. Also, if you're creating a component, it's a good practice to locate the drawing axes in some meaningful location, because the drawing axes within the component become that component's insertion point. And we'll cover components in greater detail later on. You can toggle the display of the drawing axes in the Styles window. Go to the current style and choose Edit, and then click this last button to go to the modeling settings. You can toggle the model axes right here with this checkbox. It merely displays or hides the axes. Sometimes when you're doing a presentation on screen, it looks a little bit cleaner to toggle the axes off. If you're using my shortcuts, you can toggle this by pressing Ctrl-A. There are a couple of different ways to change the axes. In the first approach, we'll use numbers, and then I'll show you how to do it graphically. Let's say we know a specific angle that we'd like to rotate the axes. This will allow us to draw geometry on an angle. Right now, if I were to draw a rectangle, it would align with the axes. Let's go ahead and change the axes and draw another rectangle and see the difference. I'm going to zoom in here a little closer and right-click on one of the axis lines. Now, it doesn't matter which line you choose, and it's important not to click when you're on top of something like this. I'm going to get a different menu if I right-click here as compared with right-clicking here. I'll choose Move from the context menu. Here we have a chance to set in an offset distance for the axis or a rotational angle. In this case, let's say we want to rotate the drawing axes 40 degrees around the blue axis. Now I'll draw another rectangle, and you'll see that it aligns with the axes. Let's say we want to go back to the original orientation of the drawing axes, but we don't want to be bothered to go back in and type in any numbers. We can just right-click on a drawing axis and choose Reset from the context menu. And we'll go back to the original drawing axis. In AutoCAD, this would be called the world coordinate system. Now let's take a look at the graphical approach to changing your drawing axes. I'll just zoom in here on these purlins and rafters. And let's say I want to create another purlin here down a bit. And I don't want to try to figure out this angle. I just want to do it graphically. Well, I can do that fairly easily by changing the drawing axes with the Change Axis tool. If you're using my shortcuts, that's Option A to activate it. And then there's a drawing axis connected to the cursor. Click a point to determine the new origin, and then click a second point to determine the direction of the red axis, and a third point to determine the direction of the green axis. Now the tripod is located here. So I can easily slide objects along its blue axis. I'll press the up arrow to lock the blue inference. And you can see that I can easily move this purlin up and down the rafters. Maybe I can rotate the point of view to show you what's happening there. So this is really the key to working with more complex geometry. If I want to work on these purlins over here, I just need to press Option A again, click here, and here to create a new orientation for the axes. Then I can go ahead and either draw a new object or move an existing one in this new plane. Just try to rotate somewhere here where you can see this a little better. There we go. So I'm able to create geometry in this plane parallel with these purlins. One final tip is kind of a convenience that I've built into my shortcuts, and that is Reset Axes. I'll press Shift A, and it automatically goes back to the original orientation for the drawing axes. You can see that down here. So just to recap, we have Option A, which allows you to set the drawing axes. We have Control A, which toggles the display of the axes wherever they are. And we have Shift A, which resets the drawing axes. If you want to change the axes numerically, you have to right-click on an axis and choose Move to access this dialog.